In this video tour, we are in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Rachavia. Rachavia is now commemorating 100 years to the establishment of this neighborhood. And what I would like to take a look at in this particular tour is the Jerusalem stone. There is a city ordinance that dates back to the British Mandate period that all buildings in Jerusalem must be covered in the white limestone that has become known as Jerusalem stone. This began in the 1920s as the British captured Jerusalem from the Turks in 1917 in the First World War, and they wanted to preserve the very special atmosphere of the city of Jerusalem. That municipal ordinance exists to this day. All buildings that are built in Jerusalem need to be covered in the white stone. You can see some of it is some of it like this looks more like a flat marble, which is not as pretty as the carved stone. Some of the carved stone looks like this building ahead of us, and some of it is a more how would you say? See, the stone here stands out a bit more, and you can see the dark color of the stone here is actually a fungus that grows on the stone, where the stone is more airy and has more room for the fungus to catch on and develop in the wet weather. So some of the stone is harder and doesn't have room for the fungus to grow and preserves its white much longer. And some of this very flat marble type of stone is typically easier to upkeep, but not as pretty as the carved stones. And here we can see some of the kind of older homes in the neighborhood. If we walk around, we'll see some of the homes that date back to the 1920s. Here we've got newer buildings that either replaced the historical buildings or were added on. If we look closer in some of the buildings, we can actually peel the onion and find the older building that a new extension was built on. Now, what is interesting here, by the way, we are on Ben Maimon Street. Ben Maimon, the son of Maimon. All of the streets in the neighborhood of Rachavia are all named for the rabbis from the Middle Ages in Spain. Spain at that time was a center of the Jewish intellect, and this street that we're on is called Ben Maimon. Ben Maimon actually refers to the Rambam. The Rambam was Maimonides. Maimonides means the son of Maimon. His father's name was Maimon. He was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. Why is this street named for his father or the son of Maimon and not the Rambam, which is a more famous name for the Rambam? Some would explain because there is another street in Rachavia that is named for the Ramban, who is Nachmanides. And the two names sound pretty familiar. One ends with an N and one ends with an M. So instead of working on the confusion, was called Ben Maimon. Across the street you can see the brown sign. It says the tomb of Jason. Jason was the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem in the 3rd century BCE, at the time of the Greek occupation or control of the land. He purchased the title of being the high priest, and we can learn more about Jason, the high priest of Jerusalem, in the book of the Maccabim. But most of all, what I would like to tell you about is this house in front of us. You see the blue sign on the wall. In many cases in Jerusalem and in other locations, when there is a historical building, the city and other agencies might place a blue sign like this that tells a little history of the building. This building today is the memorial site for former Israeli President Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who lived in this home. But actually 4 different prime ministers of Israel lived here: Golda, Meir, David Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sharet, and Levi Eshkol. But the home has been preserved as a little museum and visitor center commemorating the memory of Levi Eshkol. And one of the interesting points to notice about this house is that it is not covered in white stone, which contradicts what I described earlier, that all houses in Jerusalem need to be covered in the white stone. In Rachavia we can see a number of examples of houses that were built without fulfilling this obligation of covering the house in stone, and this is one of those houses. In many cases, the reason that the builders were given the ability to build without covering the stone was because of conflicts that took place during that time, and that caused a lack of the resource of the white stone. During the Arab riots in 1936 to 1939, there was not access to quarries in Bethlehem. So buildings that were built in that time, some of the buildings around us that were built in this neighborhood were given a break and not forced to cover the buildings in stone. But this particular house, which is the Julius Jacobs House, it was built in 1933, was the reason that they were given a permit to build without covering the house in white stone because of the tensions that existed at that time. I'm not sure. But what is interesting is Julius Jacobs, who built this home, was the highest ranking Jewish clerk, the highest ranking clerk who was Jewish in the British administration in Jerusalem at that time, in the 1930s. He was number 2 to the High Commissioner of the Palestine Mandate. And here we'll just flash the blue sign that tells some of the story of the Jacobs House, Julius Jacobs House. It tells us that Julius Jacob was the deputy governor of Jerusalem district, not of the High Commissioner, but of the Jerusalem district. So he was a pretty influential guy, and maybe he gave himself a break. I'm not sure. If you know, or if you have any sources for this question, you can let me know. All right, and now we have turned off onto Usishkin Street. I already did one video further down on Usishkin Street where there is a gate that leads to a stone wall. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet. And follow my page for more videos. Be well.